Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. My name is Charles Hallman,
I'm Dr. Mitchell-Palmer-McDonald.
and welcome to Blacklight on Sports. Tonight we deviate a little bit from sports, but not a lot. But we have a young lady here, Nekima Levy Armstrong, who I don't know if she remembers. First time we met was you were speaking at the Martin Luther King Center, something on racial justice. And I was so impressed with you. You was a law professor there, and I came back and told my editor, man, this is somebody should be out in front. So I think I made you. I think I got you going.
No, you did. You know you did. Thank you for that. I mean, you really have always been a supporter and reaching out from day one. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for being with us
Yes.
tonight. We want you to talk about just your your travels, your journey, because you have a rich journey. I mean, there's nothing you haven't done, but maybe our listeners and our viewers don't know everything about you.
Okay. So thank y'all for having me. First of all, this is a beautiful show. And I know your listeners really gain a lot from hearing what you all have to say. So, in terms of my background, I'm a civil rights attorney and an activist and the founder of the Racial Justice Network, which is a grassroots civil rights group that I founded in 2018. I moved to Minnesota in 2003 when I took a job to become a law professor at the University of St. Thomas, which is a law school located in downtown Minneapolis. And it was so attractive to me to take this position because, one, it was in the city of Minneapolis. I'd heard great things about this community. And also, I was young, I was in my 20s, becoming a law professor full time, and the law school was only 2 years old at the time. So I figured it would be an opportunity to get in on the ground floor of the institution, which focused on not just the law, but also faith and social justice. And so I felt that it would be a perfect match for me and my background. So I moved my family here in 2003. And initially, I had focused on family rights and domestic violence, or family law and domestic violence, bringing law students into court, helping them to represent women and children who had experienced domestic abuse. And around 2005, I will never forget this time in my life. I had started reading the Black newspapers, like the Spokesman-Recorder, and another Black newspaper in town. And I started to read stories that were really egregious in terms of the civil rights violations that were impacting people in the state of Minnesota. It was a huge wake up call for me when I read those stories and I realized, wait a minute, this is not just an oasis of progressivism, as they told me, not just a place where I can raise my children in peace, but this is actually the Jim Crow North. And so when I realized that, that helped me understand why I was called to Minnesota. And I remember reaching out to Nathaniel Kalik, who at the time was the president of the St. Paul NAACP. And I asked him if he would have coffee with me. I had read a story where he was speaking up, advocating for Black folks. And I just knew I needed to connect with him. And so he agreed to have coffee with me. We met at Golden Time Cafe in St. Paul in 2005. And that time together lasted for about 4 hours, where he told me story after story after story about Black folks' experiences in Minnesota and his own family and what they endured, being snatched out and uprooted from the Rondo community that they loved, which, for those who may not know, is a historically Black community that was largely self sufficient and a cultural enclave for our people. And the government decided to run a freeway through the community, which really devastated a lot of the institutions and businesses and things, and even homeowners having to be uprooted from the places that they lived and that they loved. And so Nathaniel carried those memories as a young person, seeing his grandparents dragged out of Rondo. And I feel that he transferred some of that energy to me, because by the time we were done with that conversation, I said, you know what? I'm going to start a civil rights legal clinic, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to get law students from St. Thomas, and we're going to work alongside of you. And that's exactly what happened. I went back to the law school. I talked to the dean. I said, I need to switch from family law to civil rights. And it took about 2 years to wrap up our family law cases in that clinic. And then in 2007, I launched the Community Justice Project, which is an award winning civil rights legal clinic. And although I left St. Thomas in 2016, that clinic is still open. It's being run by Professor Carl Warren, who was a civil rights professor at the U of M, but decided that he was ready in his retirement to come to St. Thomas. And I asked him if he would take over my clinic. And I was so happy that he agreed to do so. So those students are still doing civil rights work on behalf of our community to this day.
It takes a lot of energy to do your work. I mean, and I've been an admirer of you for years. But what keeps you going? It can't be coffee. But what keeps you going? Because it's got to be frustrating. You're dealing with people all the time, and you can run into roadblocks consistently, even from our own people. But what keeps you going and doing this work?
Honestly, I think it's a few different things. I think about my roots, the fact that I was born in Jackson, Mississippi, as a descendant of enslaved people. And my grandmother, who I was very close to, was a cafeteria lady. And so I watched her work very early in the morning and then come home and make sure everybody had dinner. She would also bring leftover food home from when she was a cafeteria lady. And she would still have time to go fishing, have time to mentor me and navigate, family conflicts and all kinds of things. And so the lessons from her really stuck with me, as a child. And then when I was about 8.5 years old, my mom took my sisters and me and moved us to South Central Los Angeles. So I felt that I was more in a cultural enclave in Mississippi, right? Just deep Southern roots and traditions and more of a communal atmosphere. But when I got to South Central LA, this was probably around 1985, it was just as the war on drugs was beginning. And so I moved into a low income Black and Latino community, and I saw the impacts of over policing, poverty, marginalization, unemployment, underemployment, and not to mention the impacts of the criminal justice system on our community. And so through all of that, it made me decide when I was 9 that I wanted to become a lawyer. I had seen lawyers on television advocating for people, and I said, if I can do that, then I can change things. Mm-hmm. So that was a vision that I kept in my heart from when I was 9 years old, and just continued on that path. When I was 14, I wound up getting a full scholarship to go to a boarding school in North Andover, Massachusetts. And this was a predominantly white, very wealthy institution. And as a child being thrust in that environment, I remember really beginning to understand racism, economic injustice, the impacts of the legacy of slavery on our end, but also the white privilege and the resources, that they were still benefiting off of as a result of what our people went through. So when I was a teenager in that environment, when we would have an opportunity to write for a history class, you could choose anything. And I remember reading about Harriet Tubman and writing my papers about her. And during that time, something shifted in me, because I not only saw the negative impacts of slavery and the dehumanization and brutality, but I saw the strength of a Black woman who refused to be refused and limited by that environment. And it was a shift in my mind, from when I was a kid learning about slavery. We were always seen in a negative light, even though we were the ones being oppressed, just made it seem like we were nobodies, being pushed around and mistreated and mishandled. But when I read about Harriet Tubman, I saw that there was a fire in her and a desire to resist oppression and to use what she had. She didn't have all the technology and everything else, the modern conveniences that we have access to, yet she set herself free which was very dangerous during that time, and went back dozens of times and freed who knows how many others, hundreds of others, if not thousands. And so I drew strength from that. And that's the strength that I still rely upon today when taking on the system. I always think about, this might be hard, but what Harriet Tubman had to go through was much harder. What Rosa Parks, what Fannie Lou Hamer, all these women who literally carried our legacy and the oppression on their backs, and they slayed it. They did something with it. And so that is the energy that I draw from in terms of taking on these systems and just being unrelenting in applying the pressure that's necessary to help level the playing field for our community. They expect, even when people put me in a box as an activist and they say, "Oh, she's just an activist." I'm like, "Okay." But I know that I'm a child of the Most High God first and foremost, and I carry spiritual power from God, from my ancestors, and that's what I rely upon to take on these systems and lock arms with folks who are not comfortable with the status quo.
Now, as you say that, how important is it for um, young women to see you when you were on TV, when you were in the media, when you were leading protests, when you were doing that? How important do you think it is for particularly young black women, young black students to see you in that light? Because even in our history books, and even in as I teach African American studies at the high school where I'm at, Johnson High School in St. Paul, not a lot about women that are leading it. It's always Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, and I try to bring out, even Medgar Evers, but I started bringing out and talking about their wives and what they did, and some of the students were amazed with that because they hadn't. How important do you think it is when they see you, someone that looks like them, doing what you do?
I think that it's incredibly important for them to see me and other Black women, as well as Black men, leading and helping to shift the narrative about who we are and what we stand for, and understanding that, you can be from whatever community you're from and channel that energy, not be ashamed of it. If you grew up poor in the hood,
Mm-hmm.
not society teaches us to be ashamed of our heritage, but we have nothing to be ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
We were brought here forcibly and in chains, right? And people were still able to make magic in the midst of that, literally carrying America's economic system on its back.
Yes.
Right. And so kids need to understand that that's the power that they can draw from and rely upon if they see an injustice, or if they're trying to move forward in their own lives. They don't have to just tolerate what society tries to place upon us, because it's always going to be connected to limitations. And it took me a long time to decolonize my own mind, to understand the levels of beauty in Blackness, as even being a dark skinned woman, with my hair braided or wearing natural hair, and stepping out as if I belong, and not allowing, other people's bias or, discriminatory treatment, even within our own community, towards dark skinned Black people,
Mm-hmm.
to hinder and limit me. Because as I said before, I'm a child of the Most High God. So the kids need to see this is what it means to walk in the power and authority of God, right? And not be limited by the structures and the systems that they've tried to place upon us. And I've met many young people who have seen me and others out on the front lines who've decided, to join the movement, or who,
Mm-hmm.
leverage the power that they have to speak up in schools and in other institutions. And that's what we need to have happen, right? Just as many of us saw the people who came before us braving um, police dogs and water hoses and going to jail, simply standing up for our freedom. I remember seeing those images when I started studying that movement and realizing, look, these are people just like you and me. They could have stayed in the house, but instead they took to the streets and put their bodies on the line to fight for us. So me seeing them made a huge impact in my life, and I hope that the same happens when young people see me on the front lines fighting for our people.
And then they'll pass it on.
Absolutely.
They get to the front lines.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, Nekima, one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show today, you know, we could talk about sports all the time, but I wanted people to really know who was the originator of the Target boycott, because a lot of people think it's, and no disrespect to Pastor Bryant, and no disrespect to Reverend Al Sharpton, but you and Shaletta started that boycott. And I don't think a lot of people know about that. So talk to our viewers and our listeners about your role in getting that going, the reason why you targeted Target. Hate to use that pun. To
It's the truth, though.
Why you targeted Target? Huh?
Right.
We'll talk about it.
They said expect more. We expected more, and they weren't ready for the smoke. So I will say that we know that with the election of the current president, it has brought a number of attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, as well as attacks on Black history and our institutions, and on and on. I mean, so many different groups have been attacked, but Black people in particular have come under attack through this administration. And one of the things that happened as soon as the current president took office is that he started writing these ridiculous executive orders coming for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Target, being a Minnesota based institution that was seen as a progressive company, a company that embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that led by example, instead of them standing up to standing up to the current president and showing that they had a backbone, Target capitulated so quickly, literally within days of the current president taking office. And I just thought to myself, this cannot be. This is completely unacceptable. If you have Target making an announcement that they're going to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is signaling to every company in America that it's okay to do so. And people need to understand that Target held a specific positioning in our society because of its connection to progressive causes and Black brands and the elaborate displays that they would put out, especially during Black History Month. So Target meant something to many people in our community, and we thought that we meant something to Target on some level. However, when they made that announcement, I knew that we had to take action. I don't think Target was expecting it because other companies, like Amazon, Walmart, had seemingly rolled back their focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the difference is that Target is a company headquartered in downtown Minneapolis. Minneapolis is the same city that is now known as ground zero for racial justice because of the 2020 Minneapolis police killing of George Floyd. During that time, Target was very much on the scene. As a matter of fact, one of Target's stores is right across the street from the now burned 3rd Precinct Police Station, which is the station that Derek Chauvin and the other officers worked out of. So Target was well aware of the impacts of all of this on our community. And in 2021, they decided to pledge $2.1 billion. And the $2.1 billion was supposed to specifically focus on things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, such as improving the Black customer shopping experience, increasing the number of Black brands on the shelves, improving their hiring and promotion practices for Black employees, as well as improving their supplier diversity networks. Those are all noble goals. But again, as soon as Donald Trump took office and started doing what he was doing, Target chose a side. They drew a line in the sand. And so as a Black woman, as a Target customer, as a community member, as a mother, I had to draw a line in the sand. And so I reached out to other organizers, Monique Colors Doty, and who is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Minnesota, as well as Jaylani Hussein, who is the executive director of CARE Minnesota, and talked to them about launching a nationwide boycott of Target. Now, mind you, Monique had reached out to me and a few others of us after she saw the articles talking about, so the same day that it came out that Target was going to roll back DEI, Monique reached out, and said, we got to do something. So the next morning, I took to my Facebook page and I engaged the people in my network about Target's decision. And I said, what are we prepared to do individually and collectively to address this? And people got in the comments, and I saw that they were just as upset, black and white, about Target's decision. And I remember one woman in my network in particular, a black woman in our community named Leslie Taylor, who said we should do a blackout beginning on February 1st. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. But instead of a blackout, we're going to do a boycott, of Target. And so I talked to Monique and Jaylani about it, and they were on board with it. And we decided on the timing that we were going to hold a press conference during the last week of January, announcing a nationwide boycott of Target to begin on February 1st. And Shaletta Brundage was one of the women who I reached out to ask if she would speak at that press conference to call out some of the corporate hypocrisy and our outrage, towards Target's decision to capitulate to the current Trump administration. And so that's how it all began, right? It was a nationwide boycott from the start, and it was also indefinite. We knew that you couldn't put a time limit on the situation. We said this is indefinite unless and until Target agrees to reverse its decision to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they also need to account for that $2.1 billion they pledged in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed. That was important, right? For us to hold, we're like, this is not wherever Amazon is stationed, wherever these other come, this is not Minneapolis, right? Where we have been on the front lines for many, many years in the fight for justice and police accountability. And we said, they're targeted. You're not going to play in our faces. We're going to rise up. We're going to call allies to the table. So from the beginning, it was a multiracial movement. But in our press release, we were very specific about the power of our black dollars and saying that Target would not see another one of our black dollars as long as they are aligned with an administration that is propagating hate and a lot of discriminatory treatment of marginalized groups.
Now, reportedly, Target met with black leaders when things seem to be shaky in terms of their stock prices and things like that. But I didn't hear your name being called in that group. So have Target officials met with you and reached out to you and Jelani and others?
No, Target has not reached out. I have heard through the grapevine that there are some folks who would want to meet with us, but they're not in the executive positions. We haven't received a formal invitation. We've just heard about it. So my response was, look, if Target is not ready to address these underlying concerns, don't waste my time. Right? I'm not playing games for these photo ops like we've seen, unfortunately, with some of our black leaders, or, taking a check like the National Baptist Convention, unfortunately, took a check from Target for $300,000. I don't play those games, right? And so if they are requesting to meet with me, they have to come correct, and they need to be ready to bring forward the changes that our community is asking for, right? It's so important to have leaders with integrity when they go into these backroom deals and these conversations with these corporations that have caused harm. You cannot just have anybody, in these situations. And so a company like Target knows this, and they also think that playing the game with the media, is going to get them out of this. Like I said, doing a photo op and meeting with Reverend Al Sharpton, who literally has nothing to do with the boycott, meeting with the, National Baptist Convention, and bypassing the local leaders who actually launched the boycott, in my opinion, is even more of a reason to continue boycotting them, because they don't get to choose our leaders. Right? They don't get to choose people who they think won't have a backbone at the end of the day, and won't hold them accountable. I mean, they're learning how the young people say FAFO. That's what they're experiencing right now, because they have had stock prices that have dropped. They've lost 12.4 billion valuation. Their CEO's pay has been cut by tens of millions of dollars. And it's just a cascade of different consequences that they're experiencing because of this decision to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion.
But I was on a bus coming here. I rolled past the Target headquarters and the Target store, and I still see black people going in and out, coming out with bags and bags of it. So, how has the message gotten to common folks? Yeah, has it gotten to them understanding the importance of keeping our black dollars in our pockets?
I think, in all honesty, anyone who doesn't know about the Target boycott might be, living under a rock at this point, right? At some point, some kind of media, even if it was, the pastor in Atlanta that's trying to hijack the boycott, they've heard somewhere, right, that there is a boycott of Target, and yet some people are continuing to shop there. And I just say, hey, that's your prerogative. If you want to continue to support our oppression and colonization, and give money to people who clearly don't care about our well-being, that's your choice to do that. Just like during the civil rights movement, there were plenty of black folks who did not align with Dr. King, who didn't come to the March on Washington. As a matter of fact, when you think about his letter from a Birmingham jail, when he was writing in response to the 8 white clergymen who were telling him that he was causing too much trouble in town, stirring up the town's Negroes, and they said in the letter, some of the black ministers agree with us, right? And think about that. During that time, those black ministers should have been aligned with the Dr. King's message. They should have been backing him and throwing their cultural capital and their weight behind him. But instead, they were collaborating with the very white folks who didn't want black people fighting for their freedom. And this goes back even further. If you look at the institution of slavery and the fact that black people were largely dehumanized and oppressed, you still had black folks who were working as overseers on some of those plantations, selling out their brethren to gain favor with the master. So this is, unfortunately, is human behavior. And I just say, hey, if that's the choice you're making to align with white supremacy, then go right ahead. I'm looking for who is down to spend their dollars in alignment with their values and who will speak up for freedom, justice, and equality and hold companies accountable. I don't even waste my time on people who have decided that they're going to maintain the status quo, right? Because that weighs you down. If you're trying to move everybody or drag people along who, just like Harriet Tubman, there's rumors of her pulling out a rifle and telling them, look, you either gonna come here or you going somewhere else underground, right? And so this is not new, and I have to treat it as if it's not new in order to stay focused and not be distracted by all of that. And even the exclusion of black women's voices who are in leadership in civil rights in our community is not new. If you think about during the civil rights movement, there is a famous picture during the 1963 March on Washington with Dr. King and several of the men who were organizers walking arm in arm. And that is, the picture seen around the world, right, which shows the organizers. But what most people don't realize is that Bayard Rustin, who was one of the organizers who worked closely with Dr. King, sent the black women organizers down a completely different street walking arm in arm. And those photographs of them never surfaced publicly, nor were they actually given the credit as organizers of that movement and of the 1963 March on Washington. As a matter of fact, the only woman who was invited to speak was Myrlie Evers, the widow of slain civil rights leader Medgar Evers. And she declined, to speak. She was unavailable. And then Mahalia Jackson was able to sing. So we, as young black girls, we didn't see black women being able to take their rightful positions as leaders of the movement, even though they did a lot of the heavy lifting and the organizing of that movement, which helped ring the death knell into the Jim Crow system. So I understand that history. And when I see patriarchy and misogyny at work, I just laugh. Right? Because I'm thinking, if you were secure in your manhood and everything else, you wouldn't play those games. I'm secure in my womanhood and my feminine energy and the women whose shoulders I stand on. And so that's what allows me to continue persevering in the face of all of those things.
What other events have you been involved in, as far as fighting for rights?
So recently, I have been a part of a group of lawyers and organizers that are taking on HCMC, which is the Hennepin County Medical Center, also known as Hennepin Healthcare, for their alleged discriminatory treatment towards employees and particularly Black women. So one of my colleagues, who is a fellow attorney, Seleno Simmons, has taken on the fight on behalf of employees of color. And so I'm standing with them in solidarity with them to raise awareness about these issues and to hold executive leadership and the Hennepin County Board accountable for how they treat their employees, because it is jeopardizing the health and well-being of patients. When you have people in positions of authority allowing mistreatment of workers to happen or not listening to them when they're bringing forward recommendations that improve patient care. The fact that a high percentage of the patients are people of color from low income communities means that this is a civil and human rights issue that needs to be addressed. So we just called a press conference last week to help shed light on these issues, and the battle is continuing to happen behind the scenes. I'm also involved with a group of organizers who've been putting on large rallies since the Trump administration took office. And they put on the No Kings event. It was a huge rally that happened the same day, that our state experienced the tragedy of Senator Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, and Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette being shot by a white supremacist, a white terrorist, or as far as I'm concerned, someone engaged in terrorism, domestic terrorism, was responsible. I don't know if he's a white supremacist, so let me correct that, but he was definitely a domestic terrorist, even though the media and the government has not placed that label on him. So we organized, and I showed up, to speak at that No Kings rally that day, even though the governor, attempted to cancel it. Literally tens of thousands of Minnesotans from different walks of life showed up to make their voices heard, and to show that we're not afraid, even when you have someone armed and dangerous running around. I mean, this has been the story of our lives as Black folks, right? When we have dealt with white domestic terrorism and white supremacy, and it's gone unrecognized. So those are a couple things and we actually have an event coming up on Thursday called Good Trouble. It's a demonstration that is taking place in downtown Minneapolis, starting at the Hennepin County Government Center. And it's in honor of Congressman John Lewis. It's been 5 years since his passing, and you all know he's very much connected to the civil rights movement. He was beaten on Bloody Sunday in Alabama, and then he channeled his activism into a career as a public servant in Congress. And so we'll be lifting him up in our action called Good Trouble in downtown. And I've been working very closely with the organizers and Monique Colors-Doty from BLM to help put on programming for that particular event.
Well, like I said, first time I met you, you was impressive in terms of your outspokenness, and I didn't know how long it's gonna last at St. Thomas. So I said, I don't know. St. Thomas ain't no black school. I don't know if she's gonna be there, but
I mean, it was amazing, right? That it lasted, and it could have continued. I had tenure when I left St. Thomas. I was a tenured full professor of law, and I left St. Thomas on my own terms because God called me out of the institution, and I felt that, I'm more afraid of God than anything else. And so, God made it clear that it was time for me to go, to not get too comfortable in that ivory tower, which I was comfortable, to some degree. And even with all of my street level activism and everything else, St. Thomas never brought any of those issues to me. They never, I'm sure they had alums and angry people calling them when we started shutting things down. and calling for justice back in 2014, 2015. But St. Thomas never brought any issues to my attention. They supported me. And as a matter of fact, when I told the dean that I felt that it was time for me to leave, he asked me to stay. Okay. Right. So I'll always have a place in my heart for St. Thomas Law School because, again, I was in my 20s when I started teaching law, and I was really nurtured in that environment, as well as shaped intellectually because I was around, most of my colleagues were in their 40s, right? Very accomplished people, and scholars, right? And so I feel that God placed me there almost as a training ground, right, for me to learn what I needed to learn, but also to help inspire law students and help them understand that civil rights is still alive and well, and we still need lawyers who are willing to take a stand for freedom, justice, and equality.
Well, I watch you grow over the years, and very impressive, and you have never disappointed me, and I'm glad that you have always been gracious with me when I came up to ask you a question or two after you've spoken, and you could have treated me like the other media and shoved me aside, but I think you respected, you know, that I was going to get your word out the way it should get out, unfiltered and uncensored or whatever.
Absolutely.
We always offer our guests an opportunity to speak to our audience and give them pearls of wisdom and whatever you want to say on your heart that you want them to go away with as we wrap up things. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate all the times over the years that you reached out to me asking for my perspective, right? And understanding the power of the Black media and getting a message to the people. You know, I've always felt supported by you and very grateful for you. And how you write stories that really capture the essence of what our community needs to know. So it's a no brainer. You know, anytime you reach out, anytime Mitchell reaches out, I'm happy to support your efforts in spreading the word to our community. You know, and I remember meeting your father, you know, early on, you know, and just that legacy of Rondo being alive and well in his spirit, you know, and him expressing support for me as someone new into town, and standing up for us. And I always carry that with me when I think about him and I see you as his progeny carrying on that legacy. So I would say, in terms of any words to the audience who's listening, keep your head up. You know, like Tupac said, right? Keep your head up. We know that we are in the midst of war and that our people are under attack. Our institutions are under attack. And even our understanding of who we really are is under attack because we're constantly being fed lies no matter where you look about who we are. But you have to understand that who we are runs through our DNA in our bloodline. And it's not about the way that the rest of the world tries to shape who we are. It's about us having that inner knowing that we are children of God, that we're more than conquerors, that we're mighty, that we can defeat these systems and these barriers that they try to place upon us. So I encourage people to live free, whether you're on the outside or whether you are detained behind the wall. Find your source that gives you strength. For me, it's the Almighty God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, right? For you, it might be something else, but you have to find your source, of what gives you strength and helps you to keep going, and finding who you are as a person and how you'll contribute to the world. So I want to see our people continue to shine, continue to raise your head up, raise your voices, and don't let this world try to stop your joy. You know, find your joy, find your gratitude, and walk in it. You know, no matter what they try to do, because even though we're going through it as a people, this isn't the worst that we've been through. Mm-hmm. So the people who came before us, if they can endure all the things, then who are we to cower and buckle under the pressure of a white supremacist society? We have to rise up. They've already given us the blueprint. It's really that simple.
Nekima, thank you again. Next time we'll have you talk about sports.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. This has
Yeah,
been such a wonderful experience.
yeah, we're glad.
No,
We're glad to have you.
Thank you. My honor.
well, it's ours as well. My name is Charles Hallman.
I'm Dr. MitchellPalmerMcDonald.
You've been watching Blacklight on Sports. We ask you to continue to read us in the newspaper, and we hope you join us very soon.